and have set up in the back room, which is why it's kind of echoey in here. I might be able to fix it. Hold on a second. I'll be right back.
We're almost at showtime.
Okay. I mean, if it's not really obnoxious, then I won't worry about it.
No, it's 6 minutes to showtime.
It's not that bad. Not horrible.
Sorry.
Tom, good morning. You made it.
Searching all over my computer for my invitation to the convention, so and can't find it. So I've only got 106 requests from you, Larry. So I deleted all but the latest ones. So I've got another meeting this afternoon. So
only one.
I call that one the meeting from hell. So
it must be something with the Democrats.
Yes.
That sounds like my meeting this afternoon.
Our brilliant move in the coronavirus was we belong to a Google group. Do people here belong to Google groups? Anybody? No. Okay. Anyway, we had set up a Google group where we could exchange emails with each other and with the group in general. You could post to the whole group. And I went to post, we had made some notifications of a bylaw change. So I went to post my amendments to that and it wouldn't take it. And I couldn't figure it out. So I contacted the office. Well, they never gave me any answer. They could never. And I'm thinking, well, what is wrong with the software? Because not only can't I post, I don't know if I'm receiving. So I went back and finally, after 6 weeks, they
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Larry Taylor, and I'm here with my trusty fellow parliamentarian, Carrie Capen. Say hello, Carrie.
Hello.
This is
nice
the
to
first.
See everybody again.
This is the first day of 2 days of the People for Democratic Party Reform Convention. The first day is training seminars on conventions. We'll be going through 3 segments today. The first segment is on what conventions normally look like based on democratic principles. The second segment is going to talk about how your rights have been dispositioned for the Democratic National Convention occurring in August. And then the third section is a review of conventions past. And then tomorrow is the second day of the convention, and it will be run as a regular Democratic convention. So we will start the convention off. We have a keynote speaker, the awesome Senator Nina Turner. We will then form the convention by adopting the reports, and then we have a second keynote speaker, Congressman Ro Khanna, will be speaking to us just before we adopt the platform. Then we will adopt a platform for PDPR, and then we will go through adopting resolutions, and then we will adjourn the convention. So with that, we will get started with today's convention. The way this will work is that everyone is on mute. If you have questions, you should have a question box in which you can type in questions for us. We will get to a question and answer segment at the end. If there's time, we might be able to get to questions within each segment. There's someone monitoring the chat window, so if you have some question there, possibly someone would respond to it, but that's not our primary focus today. And because of the limitations of Zoom, most of the screen is going to be the presentation itself, and our images will be off to the side. If you want to make the images a little bit bigger so you can watch our facial expressions of horror when we go through some aspects of this material, you should be able to make them a little bit bigger. So with that, we will share the screen and start the first segment. So the first segment is on what a normal convention looks like. And if you've ever been to like a professional convention, this would be a little bit more characteristic than what you might be experiencing through the Democratic Party. These are all based on the democratic principles and described in Robert's Rules of Order, which is the parliamentary authority for the Democratic Party. Yes. So just to let everyone know what a convention is, it is an assembly of delegates who are chosen to specifically for each session as representatives of the constituent units within a larger group of people to sit in a single deliberative body, acting in the name of the entire group. So you might want to keep these words in mind as we start going through the language inside how the Democratic Party is structured in the second segment. And if you want to read about conventions, this is in the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order on page 600. It describes conventions. And just one little caveat with that, Robert's Rules of Order is issuing its new edition next month, which will be the 12th edition. It's unlikely that the section on conventions and some of the more historically things that have been around for a long period of time is not going to change that much.
God knows.
So Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, so some convention examples that hopefully some of everybody are familiar with. There's like county or state political platform conventions, state delegate selection conventions before the age of COVID, Democratic National Conventions, obviously, and the Republican National Convention for that matter. We also have one with the National Association of Parliamentarians. Our last biennial convention was last fall in Las Vegas. And so usually you're elected at a more local level and then are sent to a convention, kind of the general way this works.
And here's a shot of what the last convention looked like. Maybe this is probably 2012. As you can see, conventions are big, very large, and they do have some special circumstances that require rules, and just because of the large number of people. But when we start talking about your rights, those still remain with you as being a part of a democratic assembly.
So the bylaws of whatever organization is hosting the convention should have provisions within them for conventions. So they should authorize how often conventions occur. They should define the powers and duties of the convention. They should establish a quorum for the convention. They should specify the voting members, and they should prescribe qualifications for delegates and alternates and the basis for determining their numbers and the method of electing them. And we're going to, in part 2, we're going to really kind of dive into the Democratic Party and how they do all of this. And it can be really confusing, but at its simplest, this is what you kind of need for your bylaws concerning conventions.
So one of the aspects of a convention is that you have delegates that have the right to vote, and they're credentialed. So that distinguishes them from people who are not delegates and don't have the right to vote. And and when you get to things that have a close vote, this actually makes a difference. There are several ways that in normal organizations, delegates come about. They're elected by a constituent body. They are designated through a provision in the bylaws. They are a delegate by being an incumbent officer, and they can be through being an accredited elected alternate and replacing a delegate unable to attend. And you see all of these things come into play in the Democratic National Convention.
So you want to have a provision for alternates because you want to have complete representation, and your bylaws or whatever the governing document is should provide how each electing unit will elect and the number of alternate delegates. They're normally elected in a designated order in which they'll be called to serve. So, typically how it's done is the highest vote getters are delegates, and then the next highest vote getters in order are alternates. That way, you're sending the people that were most desired by the electing body. So, as democratic as we can make it, basically.
And
sorry. Status and seating for alternates. If the alternate is to replace a delegate who's registered, you have to have evidence that the delegate is withdrawn. It has to be presented to the Credentials Committee, and then the alternate has to be re-registered as a delegate. So it's generally the delegate's responsibility to notify the Credentials Committee. So you can't just walk out and then an alternate walk in and be like, okay, I'm a voting member. Like, you actually have to, check in and say, hey, I have to leave, or I can't attend, or whatever, with the Credentials Committee. And then the alternate has to step up and say, okay, now I need to be registered as a delegate. If you're really well organized, then the Credentials Committee will contact the alternate and say, hey, your delegate has left, and so you're next up. And so in an ideal and perfect world, that's how it should go.
And this is not a hypothetical situation. We've seen this happen where someone was just there for the first vote, and then they weren't going to mess with the rest of the meeting, and so they just handed their credentials off to whomever they chose, which is an improper way to do it. It should be the next person up who becomes the delegate. So there is a formal organization procedure for conventions. And so straight out of the parliamentary authority, before any convention can transact any other business, it must officially form itself into a single voting body, which is done at the first business meeting. And this allows it to act in the name of the whole society. This is the boring meeting that many people skip just because in most conventions, these things are not an issue. There's not people trying to take away your rights and slip in rules that you need to watch out for. But this is why you need to be there, and you need to read all the material, and you have to make sure that you agree with it before you vote to approve it, because once you have approved it, as it's much more difficult to rescind it.
And
So
this is
go ahead.
This is why you should always read the documents that they send out ahead of time. I know hardly anybody does. I always do because I'm a rules geek. But like really, if you're a delegate to an organization, please, please, please read the bylaws, the rules for the convention, all the supporting documents. And if you have questions, then ask an authority. I'll share one day some of my annotated convention rules or bylaws because the first thing I do is read through them and make notes in the margins about questions or things that I think are unusual or concerning. So, so the formal organization, the official organization of the convention is brought about by the separate consideration and adoption of 3 committees. So the Credentials Committee, that establishes who's a delegate and who's not, how many of them are, whether a quorum's been met, all of those important things so that business can be transacted officially. Then the Committee on the Standing Rules. So your convention should have its own set of rules that are adopted internally. So you've got bylaws of the organization overall, and there might be a whole host, like in the case of the Democratic National Convention, a whole host of supporting documents, but the ones that really matter during the convention is the standing rules for the convention. And then the program committee, and those need to go in that order because that makes sense. You have to establish who's voting and a quorum, and then you have to establish rules that you're going to do stuff by, and then you can adopt the program or the agenda for the whole process.
And if you've taken a look at the program that was sent out last night for the convention tomorrow, you'll see the proposed standing rules, and that will be the second order of business tomorrow, is the acceptance of those rules by the convention body itself.
And keep in mind too that you as a member, once you've been all credentialed and checked in and verified, you have the right to make changes to those rules. So if you read them ahead of time and have something that's really concerning or that you think is just not right, that's your opportunity to change it, and it's much easier to change it before you. Sorry, I'm stepping on your slide there, Larry, but it's much easier to change it once you before you adopt it.
Yes, it's important to remember that each report is debatable and amendable. So if this has happened within past Democratic conventions, and we'll talk about that in the third segment. If there are competing delegations from a state and both are claiming that they are the official delegation, then you can contest the credentials report if you don't agree with their ruling on who the official delegation is. And if a majority if a majority agrees with you, then you have rejected the credentials report, and presumably the convention comes to a stop until that is straightened out, because you do have to establish who the legitimate voting members are in the convention. A majority is required for credentials in the program, but 2/3 is required for standing rules. And the reason why it's a higher threshold for acceptance is because there's usually rules in the standing rules that curtail your rights to speech. So your fundamental rights to speech is twice for 10 minutes, but because conventions are limited in their time and there's so many people, there might be proposed rules that limit the amount of speech that you have. And so 2/3 of the convention delegates have to agree to this. And so with the adoption of these 3 separate reports, the convention is officially recognized for conducting business.
Larry?
Yes.
I want to interrupt. On where you have the standing rules, each one of those rules, and they're usually given as a group and voted on, but any member who doesn't like a standing rule can ask for a separate vote on that rule. And therefore, it just on the demand of a single member, you can have a separate vote. If you wish to amend that rule, then that requires a majority to amend, and then that rule by itself may be adopted either by a majority or a 2/3 vote, depending on the nature of the rule. Usually, it's only 1 or 2 rules that get singled out for a separate vote, though.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. And that is Tom Helveka, our parliamentarian for this weekend. He's also a professional registered parliamentarian with the National Association of Parliamentarians.
And resident know-it-all, too.
And keep in mind, for everybody who's not a parliamentarian, that you as a member have certain fundamental rights. So you have the right to vote, you have the right to make motions, you have the right to speak in debate, and but the organization as a whole can curtail or limit those rights or adjust them. So that's why there's a higher threshold, and I mean I think that's good because it helps protect everybody's rights. My favorite description of parliamentary procedure is that it helps enable the will of the majority while protecting the rights of the minority. So those kind of 2/3 votes and whatnot help protect the minority. And if you have less than a third minority, well, you're kind of out of luck. But what can you do? So Robert's Rules on Credentialing. There was a we're going to talk about this later, I'm sure, but there was a case of contested seats in a delegation at the 1964 Democratic Convention. There was from Mississippi sent two delegations, one that was racially segregated, it was all white, and then the other one that was racially integrated, and there was a whole to do about the credentialing of those delegates. So it is important, again, to pay attention to the boring stuff at the beginning, because you can disallow delegates right from the get-go, and that can put you at a disadvantage later on.
So there should have been formed a credentials committee, and in the normal convention, the credentials committee has the following duties. They distribute in advance the authorized number of attendees. They collect registration material. They do the compilation of the list of members entitled to register. They make arrangements for the registration. Then they are controlling the registration process itself. And then they prepare the committee's first report, which is the first order of business. One of the things to watch out for, sorry, Carrie, one of the things to watch out for is who does the credentialing. So, some states find all of this sort of taken over by the state staff. You need to have your elected representatives of the credentials committee participating and overseeing what goes on, because we know that you can't necessarily trust the staff of the Democratic Party to do the right thing. You need your elected people overseeing it. And if you have elected, morally compromised people to run these processes, then that's a separate problem. Go ahead, Carrie.
Well, and not even, ascribing any negative intent or anything. Like sometimes, a staff or whatever might just be like, well, we've always done it this way. Like, well, but that's not right. So, you're violating members' rights. So, there's not always nefarious intent. So, moving right along to the standing rules. So, the Committee on the Standing Rules for a convention, they draft and submit for consideration a group of rules known as the proposed standing rules of the convention. A copy of these rules should be handed out to each delegate as they register. It requires a 2/3 vote, and seriatim consideration is not applicable, although, as Tom said earlier, you can ask to consider individual rules on their own. So this is usually a process that happens way before the convention actually starts. I was actually chaired the committee here in my state that wrote the convention rules for our delegate selection plan. That didn't happen. But it took months and months and months to work out all the rules and to get them all drafted and then ready to go for consideration, and then lots and lots of proofreading by lots and lots of people, so that it was ready to go for the actual convention itself. Then
the third the third report is the program committee's report, and that's how the time will be spent during the convention. Usually these are created with the best intent possible, and so it's never anything that needs to be questioned, because people have created the program with good intent. They've arranged specific things to happen at certain times during the convention. If the media has to be there for certain things, then they've already received prior notice, and so it's very difficult to deny the program that's proposed. Although you still should look at it and make sure that it is appropriate, and that you do not need to amend something, but you have the right to amend the program itself. And if a majority agrees to the amendment, then that's what has to happen, because the meeting belongs to the majority of the delegates in the room, not to another body.
Right. So, like I said, kind of before, the first meeting is the business meeting of the convention is really important. You need to attend. That's where you adopt these 3 reports. You elect your officers who are applicable, and it's your primary opportunity to make corrections. You can make corrections later, but it's a lot more difficult. And sometimes there's very limited opportunities to change it later. So it's important. I know nobody likes reading through all those documents that you get ahead of time, but it's important that you read them and understand them. And if you have questions, reach out to folks like myself or Larry or Tom or other parliamentarians that you might have lurking about to help you help explain things to you and walk you through something. But generally, you want to read those documents ahead of time so that you know what you're getting into, and read them critically. Like, I know a lot of people just read them. They're like, okay, yeah, it looks good to me. But you want to make sure and are giving critical consideration. That's why I make annotated copies. I actually print them out, which I'm killing trees, but so that I can draw on them and read them critically, because that helps me process through them. So it's important, and it can help at least reduce, if not eliminate, shenanigans later on.
And you also don't have to accept the officers that have been nominated. It's awkward to replace someone who's been trained for weeks on the script for the convention, and so this has to be done very carefully. But it is conceivable that someone completely unacceptable has been proposed to chair the convention, but it is ultimately up to the body if they agree to have that person chairing it. The role of a chair is to conduct the will of the body. It's not to make the body do certain things. And so you want a chair that respects the rights of the delegates.
Basically, you have to remember that you have that the members of the body are the ultimate authority. Like, that authority can get delegated out to other other members, or to other committees, or to the officers, or whatever. But you want to be really cautious when you're doing that, because once you give those rights away, it's really hard to get them back. And I know in the next segment we're going to talk a little bit about rights that have been taken away and how it was done. So
once you have formed the convention, then the program kicks in, because you've accepted how you're going to spend the balance of your time inside the convention. And this is where you have the opportunity to vote on resolutions, and you have some conventions have the election of officers and other positions within the party, and you have the right. You, as Carrie mentioned earlier, you have the 4 fundamental rights in a democracy as a delegate to the convention. You have the right to attend meetings. You have the right to speak and debate. You have the right to make motions, and you have the right to vote. And for any of those rights to be taken away, it has to be done by a rule that was agreed upon by 2/3 majority of the convention itself. And this will be something that we're going to talk about in the next segment, because it's not clear that what has been done to us as convention delegates is correct. And so what we will do is describe how the hierarchy of laws work, and then how you interpret them. It's not some mythical language. It's actually very clear, and if you sit down and have your decoder ring and can pull it all apart. So that's what Carrie and I have done for you, and we'll be going through that at the next hour. Is there anything you'd like to add, Carrie?
Yeah. So a lot of people, I think a lot of people have a kind of a bad idea about parliamentary procedure in general and Robert's Rules of Order specifically, and that's fostered by the people that are in control. That Robert's Rules of Order is super complicated and difficult to use, and they try and discourage people from learning about it. Robert's Rules of Order in general, at its most basic, is extremely logical. And once you understand just the very basic principles, then you can actually get by a lot. Like you look at Robert's Rules of Order, the actual book. And it's 700 and some pages long, and it's a terrible book. It's hard to read. It's difficult to understand. But the basic principles that underlie that are generally pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So if you learn just your very basic rights and keep those in mind, then you can generally get by in most scenarios. It drives me crazy. People talk about the weaponization of Robert's Rules, and that's absolutely true. It does get weaponized, but not in the way most people think. Like it gets, people talk about, oh, it's so complicated, it's so hard, so we're just going to use Bob's rules and just do things kind of informally. But that means that you can just pull rules out of the air and be like, well, this is how we do it because we're just doing things informally. And you don't have anything to fall back on. So it's really important that you know your basic fundamental rights and, at least the basics of what you want, how to do things in, and how to behave in meetings. I know on the next slide, we put up our two favorite books, which is Robert's Rules of Order and the new edition, so pretty and white. But then I would really recommend that people not read that one. Like, unless you really want to go into the weeds and follow rabbit trails down about the ins and outs of complicated things, don't read this book. It's terrible. But
it's not that bad.
Good read. No, it's a terrible book. I'll read an excerpt here in a minute. But the one that you should read is Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, because that's like 120 pages. It's written in plain English. It covers all the basics. It gives you scripts. It tells you, how to preside over a meeting, how to process a motion, like all of those basic things. And that covers, 80 to 90% of what happens in a meeting. I do a lot of trainings for organizations, and I always recommend this book and give it away freely to people all the time. But also, if you just cover, how to process a motion, how to make amendments, how to refer something to a committee, that's what happens 90% of the time in a meeting. And if you know how to do that, you're set. And then it's when you get yourself into more complicated situations, that's when you contact a parliamentarian and have us help you. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. That's a passion of mine.
So one of the problems is when you have leadership that doesn't want to follow the rules and you don't know your rights, so you don't know what to assert. Trevor Noah, it was about a year ago on his show, he said, Americans, I think I found a problem in your democracy. You have no recourse when your leadership decides to violate the rules. And we have seen this in 2016 when people tried to take the DNC to court over some of the things that they had done. And I believe the courts ruled that, well, you're a private organization, and so there's nothing that we can do to help you. You need to run your stuff. And so it is very difficult to go to the courts and enforce the bylaws that you've adopted. And it is a problem when you have elected leadership that intentionally violates your rights and takes them away. There are ways, and this is described in Robert's Rules of Order, on how to remove leadership but it is a very nasty process, and no one walks away from it feeling good about it. So rather than have it forcing yourself to go down that path, it is better to elect good leadership that will respect your rights in a democratic meeting, so that the will of the majority is carried through. So what we can talk about, first of all, do we have any questions that need to be answered? It looks like there's nobody's entered questions into the queue. Oh, looks like there is one.
Yes, there are a couple.
Why don't you go ahead and read them, and then Carrie and I will answer them.
Okay. So the big question a couple people have is, so it would appear, since we are being asked to vote between August 3rd and August 15th before the convention ever commences, that would be a problem, correct?
Bingo.
Yes, absolutely.
And in the next segment, we're going to talk about how this come about and why we feel that this is an issue, as you had just articulated.
Okay. One more quick question someone had is program committee different from platform committee?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Carrie.
So the program committee they're basically setting the agenda for the convention. So program and agenda and I'm blanking on the other term, but can be used kind of interchangeably. A lot of people use program for like a presentation at a meeting, but a program is it's the equivalent of an agenda. So they're the ones setting everything up. And for something like the national convention, like that involves setting up stuff with television and with speakers and all that. And so that's why there is a separate committee that works on just those logistics of all of that. And then the platform convention. So the platform of an organization is a summation of your values and priorities, and so that's a whole separate thing. So hopefully that is as clear as mud.
Okay, I think we've just got one more maybe right now waiting in the wings. Are we going to have examples today of recommended rules change requests for the August DNCC? Right.
Well, if we had seen the rules, we might be able to come up with some. My understanding that the way the leadership is currently planning to run this is that, as someone mentioned earlier, the voting happens prior to the convening of the convention, and that there is actually no convention that we would be attending as participants. And so it's going to be basically a TV show. And this is problematic. There are ways to run a convention with electronic tools, just like we will be doing tomorrow. And the justification for the switch, I think, is very questionable. It's a lot of COVID-19, blah, blah, blah. Because of COVID-19, we have to take all your rights away, which is not necessarily true.
This is a favorite trick that I've seen in multiple organizations now. It's two tactics. One, because of X, we have to do Y, and there's just no time to debate it. Or also just, the budget has to be approved at this meeting because we waited until at this meeting, which is, 3 days before the deadline. And so there's just no time to amend it or debate it or do anything. Or they do this kind of workaround. They rely on your ignorance, and then once they present it to you, it's just like, well, we've always done it this way, and so it's totally cool. And it drives me crazy. And the best recourse is just to be to get as educated as possible, and of course, every time you turn around, there's something that's popped up that you hadn't experienced before, and they take advantage of that, and it's endlessly frustrating, but you just have to keep on plugging along and try and if it is something that's too late to address, try and set things in place and build a foundation so that next time around it'll be better. That's frustrating for people in the trenches at the time, but hopefully it makes life easier for the next round. So that's sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
Yeah, and going back to the basic principles of democracy, when you start out, all the power belongs to the assembly. So in the case of the convention, all the power belongs to the convention delegates, and through a process of bylaws, they allocate that power out to officers and to committees to do certain things to make the organization run better. If you find yourself in a situation where your chair is abusing the power or has taken more power than they should be, there should be a process of recourse available to you, which is called recalling. And you shouldn't shy away from doing these things if this is a situation you feel you're in, and the abuse of the membership has been so egregious that you need to do that. So the recall procedure is described in the bylaws of your organization. In a convention situation, because that's something that happens once every 4 years, it's a little bit different than a regular democratic situation. But as we said earlier, there's going to be convention officers proposed, and if you do not want to accept them in the convention, it is up to the convention to propose an alternate. And so if you wanted to do that in a normal convention, you would have to have someone that was prepared and able to step up on the stage to take over driving the event, if that's what the majority needed to have happen.
Yep.
Is there any other questions, Sonia?
Yeah, we've got this should be a quick one. What's the difference between the 11th and 12th edition of Robert's Rules?
We don't know. It's still in pre-publication state right now. It'll be released next month. What I've heard is that because a lot have changed in terms of electronic meetings in the past 10 years, that's an area that is not very fully developed in the 11th edition. But there are the basics of the concepts there, which are, you must have your rights retained in an electronic meeting, unless by a 2/3 vote, the membership has agreed to give up rights based on the electronics used and whatever. But just because you're in an electronic meeting doesn't mean that you automatically give up your rights to participate. You should still retain your right to speak, so they cannot put you on mute. They should retain your right to vote. So because they have a voting system that you can't operate because of whatever mobile device you're on, that is not acceptable unless 2/3 of the group has agreed that that's how you're going to proceed. And you have the right to make motions, so you can't be put on mute, and you can't not be recognized if it is appropriate to recognize you. And you have to be able to speak in debate. We have, since we formed People for Democratic Party Reform, we have heard multiple horror stories about state parties who have egregiously taken away rights of membership. And even in our own state, we have not approved Maestro, which is a really sucky system for running meetings and for voting, but we have never approved that. And so if we had a state party that really cared, we could challenge that and get that removed. But we have some housekeeping to do here in our own state before we can do that. But you should approve the technology. You should approve your voting system, and all of that should be agreed to by the membership, unless you have given the rights to make those decisions away to someone else.
Right.
Did I answer the original question?
Yes, electronic meetings is going to be greatly expanded, as that's what I've heard as well. So I'm really looking forward to that, because it really is a complicated topic, and I suspect in the 13th or 14th edition there'll be even more information about that. And finding that balance between between practicalities and limitations of technology, and the rights of the members, is, I mean, it's important. Like there are certain realities that people have to account for, but at the same time, like there's no point in having a representative democracy if the representatives can't do anything. So that's it should be. I'm really looking forward to the next edition because I'll be interested to see what kind of information and guidance they're providing. Because right now the section on electronic meetings is pretty sparse, and so we'll see what happens. So, anything else?
Yep. Well, there's a bit of a recurring theme you'll notice. Isn't the fact that we aren't really allowed to vote on the vice presidential pick undemocratic, as they're supposedly part of the ticket that represents the American people of the Democratic Party? It just seems like another way for the DNC to control who's put into power and not allow the will of the people to make a choice.
Yes.
And we don't know if this is completely true because allegedly the vice presidential pick will be done shortly here, and so that they could actually show up on the ballot that we will cast between the 3rd and the 15th. It says in the charter of the Democratic Party that the things happening at the convention are the nomination of the president, the vice president, the approval of the platform, and other business that we need to attend to. So it says specifically in the charter, inarguably, that the approval of the platform of the party will happen by the delegation in the convention. And so what we will talk about in the next segment is how this has been finessed and packaged up and bought off by your DNC members, the delegates to the Democratic National Committee.
Here's a quick one that doesn't fall into that same general vein. Are caucus meetings where debate occurs and motions are made?
No. There might be a provision for, and you have to look at the rules. So this is another reason to read through the rules and find out where things happen. But caucuses are just it depends on what powers have been given to the caucuses. Fundamentally, there is no power that is given to a caucus, so that has to be described in the bylaws or in the convention rules. And so it is conceivable that a caucus could come up with a resolution, and the resolution would go to the floor for a vote. But those are all processes that should be described in the convention rules.
Okay. I'm just going to remind everyone to please post their questions in the Q&A box rather than chat, and we should be caught up for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate the interesting questions. Question and answer period can often be the most interesting part of a presentation.
So if you want to study Robert's Rules of Order, this is something that seems to have fallen out of our school system. Once upon a time, people studied Robert's Rules of Order and when they were in high school, and they studied civics, so they understood the 3 branches of government and all that stuff. And then some of this was taken over by 4-H and sort of private organizations, and we have leadership groups within high schools that form competitions, and that still trickles on a little bit but we're finding here in our own state that this mostly happens in the rural parts of the state and not so much in the urban part of the state. And so when it comes to knowing your rights and what you need to assert, this is all stuff that's been lost. And what we feel is that something is missing, and we know that we're being screwed, but because we haven't studied the material, we don't know how to assert our rights and get them back. And that's what has motivated both Carrie and I to immerse ourselves in this, because up until 2016, we were one big happy family within the Democratic Party, and we trusted our leadership, and everything was hunky-dory. And then we started finding our decisions being made outside of meetings that was not appropriate. We things that should be done inside of meetings were held in informal gatherings somehow, and that was considered official. And so we both plunged into the material, and the way we did that is that we found a local group of the National Association of Parliamentarians and joined up and started learning this material from people who are already familiar with it. And that is really the best way to learn the material, is to find someone to talk to and pose situations that you've encountered, and then learn how to interpret the bylaws and the parliamentary authority to come up with the answers of what you should do or how to handle certain situations. So the National Association of Parliamentarians is the keeper of the parliamentary authority called Robert's Rules of Order, which is the predominant parliamentary authority in the United States. There's a couple of other ones that rattle around out there, but they are only adopted by a small minority. And the roots of parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules has direct lineage back to the formation of our country. So the things that are in there now was information that General Roberts got from reading the Senate rules that Thomas Jefferson wrote, and those were based on what they did in Parliament, and really some of the fundamental things you see today in Robert's Rules of Order has its links back to decisions in the formation of parliamentary procedure in the 1600s. So if you want to find a local group, you just Google National Association of Parliamentarians, and you can do a search for groups in your area. If you don't have any local groups, you can find a group that studies virtually. Carrie and I are both involved with a group that is formed on the West Coast of the United States, and we meet once a month and we talk about issues, and we have set up a special meeting for our fabulous contingent from California, because they're turning into being parliamentarian enthusiasts down there. And so you can do the same thing. There's a group on the East Coast called the Green Gavel Parliamentarians that you can join that also does really good programs on studying this stuff. As we said, you can pre-order the 12th edition of Robert's Rules of Order, which will be shipped out in the next couple of weeks. And the National Association of Parliamentarians is actually having a training conference in August that will go over the changes in the new document, and also have specific training seminars which you can attend, and those are open to outsiders as well. So both members and non-members can sign up and go for that, and you can learn about both of those at the website for the National Association of Parliamentarians.
It's also really a good idea to make friends with parliamentarians. We love this stuff, and we'll happily spend many hours of our lives reading documents and talking about parliamentary things. And I know I, for one, spend many hours on phone calls and email chains with people, guiding, walking through documents and walking through processes and writing scripts and doing trainings. And that's honestly, it's my favorite thing to do is to do just basic. I could do basic trainings all day long, where just go over the basic rights, how to do basic things in meetings that you see every day. And, basically, as my friends put it, preach the gospel of Roberts, because I really think that it's that important. And it's something that I enjoy doing. And I like going through all of the horrible language in Robert's Rules and trying to parse out what it means.
The biggest mind shift that you make is that if you come from an environment where your rights have been withheld, and that is the only environment that you are accustomed to, it is really hard to understand what has been taken away from you. And so you read this and you go, oh my goodness, I had the right to do that, or that is where I should have questioned something coming up. And so it takes time to understand how your rights have been taken away. So it can't be done in a 10-minute quickie. It can't be done in a 1-hour overview. It does take several months to really learn this stuff if you come from a very toxic environment where all of your rights have been taken away. The concept of democracy is really, really difficult to many people, and we even see this in the progressive movement, where they do not turn over the reins of power to the majority. You find organizations set up where the leadership has to keep control of the organization because that's the only way they think that they can survive. They really should turn it over to the membership in a democratic fashion and let the majority decide the future of it. And a great example of this is in Alabama and the work that was done there. They had a very controlling chair, and they treated the Democratic Party as a priesthood, and the same people were elected over and over again. And finally, they were turned in to the DNC, and a complaint was registered against them. And it took some doing, but what eventually happened was that the DNC forced them to have a reorganization, and so the chair had to run for her position again. She lost. They elected someone who actually believed in democracy, and guess what happened? The party is now much more active. There's people donating because it's now a democratic institution. They've opened up their doors to more participation. People are getting involved, and perhaps Alabama will be a little less red in the coming years. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, to tag on to that, so one of my favorite quotes from a former Democratic official here in our state was, "We don't really want a lot of people involved because it makes it harder to get what we want done." And just like the rage engendered by that statement has really sustained me in the last 5 years, because that's not democratic. That's that's small d democracy. It's like that's important, and especially for all of us who are involved in the supposed Democratic Party, we should embody democratic principles, and so. This is kind of my contribution for making the Democratic Party as democratic as possible.
And it's all about the allocation of power. And if you are trying to take back power from someone who has seized it from you, then they're not going to say, "Oh, here you go." It's probably going to be uncomfortable, but it is something that we have to do to restore democracy in all the levels of society, and in particular the Democratic Party, which is why this organization exists, which is People for Democratic Party Reform. We really need to restore democracy to all levels of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party should be much more powerful than it certainly is. We should not be struggling to regain control of the Congress. If the Democratic Party was actually run democratically, we would have supermajorities in both houses and the presidency, and we wouldn't be going through the struggle that we're going. So the Democratic Party has to recognize that its people are its members, and that control needs to be turned back to them.
Another good book to read for reformers is Saul Alinsky's Rule for Radicals. I don't know how many have ever read that book, but that explains the relationships of power within organizations, or the dynamics of power. And it says, it's never given. It's power is something that's always taken. So if you want to have your rights, you're going to have to get up there and assert it. They're just not going to walk around to you and say, "Gee, Amber, would you like to say something today?" You're going to have to, and don't be shy. They are your rights. And another quote I always heard was that a lynch mob is a democracy with one exception. So.
Is there any final questions, Sonia?
We have a couple, but I'm gonna just get back to one or two for the moment, and one's a little more rhetorical, which is just in a large convention setting, is it even possible to have reasonably have Robert's rules conducted? And this person's also wondering if there is a national political convention that has ever properly used Robert's rules.
Yes, and yes. I'll try not to geek out too hard on people. So Robert's Rules of Order actually is designed for large groups. Just on general principle, if you've got 10 or 15 people, you can generally come to decisions through consensus and just talk through it and get things done. And Roberts provides for that. The larger the organization is, the assembly is, the more important it is to kind of follow the formal steps and actually do things properly to ensure that all voices are heard. And then as for whether it's been used properly or not, I actually stumbled randomly at a thrift store across a copy of, I want to say, the 1924 Democratic Convention, their national convention. It went on for like 3 weeks. There was motions being made and voted down and coalitions being formed, and like they had to move venues several times because it kept going and going. They had finally nominated their nominee after like 108 ballots before they finally got a thing. So the conventions actually used to be a lot more, hardcore parliamentary wrangling than they are. Now they're just a big show, basically. And especially this upcoming one is just going to be a television program, which is neat and all, but that's not actually democracy. So.
And actually, an electronic meeting could actually be more democratic in a convention setting because, I've been to 2 of them. We've always had a microphone sitting in the center of our delegation and someone guarding it because God forbid anyone get up and speak. But that's why that microphone is there, because you as delegate has the right to go up and to make a motion. Now, if you were going to do this in a convention, you should plan ahead and do things. But that is what it is there for. Being an electronic meeting, you should be able to, raise your hand in Zoom, and someone should be able to recognize you, and you could exercise your rights of whatever you want to do. And if you're trying to make an invalid motion, then they'll rule it as an invalid motion. But that you have these rights as a participant in the organization. Hi, Leslie. So we're going to take a 3-minute break, and we will resume this with the next segment at the top of the hour. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Sorry about that. Somehow I got muted. Can you hear me now, Carrie? Carrie's muted.
Oh, yep, I got it.
Sorry about that, guys.
Okay, I'm going to start over because I don't know how much was heard. So this is the second segment of the seminar. My name is Larry Taylor. I'm president of People for Democratic Party Reform, and I'm here today with my co-chair, with my co-parliamentarian, Carrie Capon.
Hi, guys.
So what we're talking about in this segment is the rights of delegates, and specifically about what has been done to the rights of delegates in the 2020 convention. This is a little wonky, and we're going to get into some very specific language, but it's really how our rights have been taken away in this convention, and it's important for everyone to understand what happened. This is not some incomprehensible process done by some undefined group of people. We know exactly who did this and where changes need to be made going forward. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the relationship of the governing documents inside of an organization. And we're using the Democratic Party as an example, but you'll find the same structure in any group that has a set of bylaws and a charter and standing rules and all that stuff. So in the Democratic Party, which dates from the early 1800s, we have the Democratic Party Charter, which is and certainly in its first section, a very aspirational document where they talk about how much they love all the Democrats and how valuable we are down at the grassroots level. And it's very mom and apple pie. Great document. Governing that is the party bylaws. So anything in the bylaws has to be consistent with what's in the charter. And then below that is the regulations of the Rules and Bylaws Committee, which has to be consistent with everything in the party bylaws. So all the power that was given to the Rules and Bylaws Committee stems from the charter and the bylaws itself. The Rules and Bylaws Committee has very specific powers that have been given to them. And one of the things that they do is that they issue the call to the convention, and they issue the guidelines for the delegate selection plan, which many of you are probably familiar with. They've been around for over a year, and we follow them for the selection of the delegates. There were a couple of other things going on also. So there's the Parliamentary Authority, which for the Democratic Party is Robert's Rules of Order. And the Parliamentary Authority is used when something is not defined in the charter or the bylaws. So the default process is if something is not superseded by what is in the bylaws of the charter, then you can find that in the Parliamentary Authority. So if there's something in the bylaws that overrules the Parliamentary Authority, then the bylaws supersede. If you remember that there was a unity report that came out of the 2016 convention, it was approved in the concept of it was approved in the Rules Committee. It was then brought to the floor and approved as a motion from the Rules Committee, and it was approved on the convention floor. And what that report did was it was about making some fundamental changes to the 2020 convention. And so we saw some of those things manifest itself. So the rule about superdelegates not voting on the first round was a result of the Unity Commission. And I believe they did some cleanup on the caucus states on how counts were reported. But those changes only are in effect for the 2020 convention, and there's nothing binding going forward. And so there was a bunch of discussion about what happens going forward. And I've just heard rumors about what happens, but no facts. But that is addressing the problem really low in the hierarchy of documents. And so what People for Democratic Party Reform is proposing is that we make changes to the party bylaws and the charter itself so that these fundamental changes to make the Democratic Party more democratic are built into the governing documents, and it's not something that someone can just ignore later on.
Yeah. So, so Larry kind of covered what, documents rule this whole process. So here's kind of an overview of the structure of the party. So it says right in the charter that the ultimate authority is the Democratic National Convention. So the Convention of Delegates, that happens every 4 years, they are the ones that are supposed to be running the whole show. Obviously, we know that that's only marginally true these days. So then you have the National Committee. So the much maligned DNC. The DNC is made up of delegates and elected officials and all sorts of people. And then they form the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and they also help organize state, the parties in the state. They support them and whatnot. And then the State Central Committees feed back into that. And so it's there's a little bit of give and take there. Further complicated, the relationship between the National Committee and the state committees. There's a lot of top-down leadership and whatnot, but really their authority over the states is kind of murky, to say the least. It's all very complicated. And so, there's all of that, but just keep in mind that top of that pyramid is the National Convention. So the delegates that are sent to the National Convention are supposed to be the most powerful group. They're the ones, I don't have it in front of me, but the threshold to change the charter is lower at the National Convention than it is at a regular DNC meeting, because that's how they have it set up. But so, needless to say, the powers that be try and restrict the rights of the delegates down as low as possible so that they don't go crazy and enact democracy in the Democratic Party.
So you want to keep the structure in mind when we talk about who's changing who and telling who what they can and cannot do.
Yeah. National Convention, the DNC, the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and then off to one side, the State Central Committees, because that's kind of a separate category.
So as we said in the previous segment, your rights in a normal convention, you have your basic rights in a democratic organization, which is the right to attend meetings. You have the right to make motions, you have the right to speak and debate, and you have the right to vote. And these apply to conventions.
Right. So your rights in electronic meetings, because now with COVID and everything, we got to have electronic meetings. You still have, you should still have all of those rights. So you should have the right to set up electronic provisions. So you should vote on who, what technology is used for speaking, what technology is used for voting, and if they're not doing that, then that's not very democratic of them, because if the assembly hasn't agreed to the method by which, that's why you adopt rules at the beginning of a convention, or you adopt rules when you form a society, is so that everybody is clear on the methods for enacting business. And it shouldn't be any different for an electronic meeting, is what rules are we as a body going to agree to in order to do things in our meetings. And since one of your rights to do things is to make motions and speak and debate and to vote, then you need to have technology to support that.
And the parliamentary authority, and this is where parts of the parliamentary authority are universal concepts. The definition of a democratic meeting is for people to meet in one room. So you can see other people and you can talk to other people and you can actually have a meeting. And anything that deviates from that means that you have given up rights for something. So you can do an approximation of that in an electronic meeting by giving everyone the ability to speak. But what if you have a disability that makes that you unable to participate equal to other members? Those are things that need to be considered. And so, according to the rules, you should approve. You have to have something in the bylaws that, first of all, even allows you to have an electronic meeting, and secondly, you should vote on technology such as what you're using for voting. It has to be accepted by the body, because in both of these cases, you're giving up rights from the gold standard of what a democratic meeting is defined as. So this is the section that Carrie was referring to earlier, and this is what the charter says in very clear English. The National Convention shall be the highest authority of the Democratic Party, subject to the provisions of this charter.
Can't get any more clear than that. I don't think so. So, and here's what I alluded to: Charter Article 10, Section 1. This charter may be amended by a vote of a majority of all the delegates to the National Convention, provided that no such amendment shall be effective unless and until it is subsequently ratified by a vote of the majority of the entire membership of the Democratic National Committee. The charter may also be amended by a vote of 2/3 of the entire membership of the Democratic National Committee. So this is a lower threshold than at a regular DNC meeting. Because the DNC meets quarterly, and so that would require a 2/3 vote, and whereas it can be done by a majority vote at the National Convention, and then it gets ratified, blah blah blah. But that's still, that's extraordinary that's the thing. So that is why, of course, they want to abridge everybody's, the delegates to the National Convention. They want to abridge your rights down to make it as difficult as possible for you to actually enact any changes, in my opinion. Right.
And then in the bylaws, so remember we have the charter at the top, and then below the charter is the bylaws, and these are both contained in basically the same PDF. And if you want to read these, we have them posted on the pdpr.org website, so you can pull them up and see what they are. So bylaws.
They are also at the DNC. They're posted on the DNC website as well.
Yes. The bylaws may be adopted or amended by a majority vote of the National Convention, so again, the convention that's happening in August, or the Democratic National Committee, provided that 30 days written notice of any proposed bylaw or amendment has been given to all members of the National Committee, and then unless adopted in the form of an amendment to the charter or otherwise designated, any resolution adopted by the National Convention relating to the governance of the party shall be considered a bylaw. So that just says that things are not in the charter or bylaws.
So Chair Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, released a statement, and he said, in order to streamline convention proceedings and provide maximum flexibility in light of the pandemic, the resolution also makes changes to the process of how the reports of the Rules and Credentials Standing Committees will be considered. The RBC reaffirmed during the discussions that these changes are only in effect for the 2028 convention and do not impact for future conventions. So that language right there, that reaffirmation, is a little bit problematic, because you can't just say something is so when it's not included in the actual resolution. So if you make a resolution and that is in effect a change to the bylaws, then that's it. It's there, and it just stands there forever. So then if somebody just comes, a random person or a random committee says, oh no, this is just for this one convention, don't worry about it, I would be really suspicious of that. So that's just me.
And in this case, the changes that we're discussing were changes to the call of the convention. So the DNC modified the call of the convention as opposed to the bylaws. So that's why he can say, oh, this is just for 2020, because it was just to the call of the 2020 convention. However, right. I think we need to watch this very closely.
Yeah.
So this is what your Democratic National Committee members passed earlier this year. So every state has members to the Democratic National Committee, and they also were unable to meet physically together and debate this stuff. So this was sent out as an electronic item, which we're going to talk about. But this is what they passed. So under the call, the Democratic National Convention Committee has the authority to plan, arrange, manage, and conduct the convention, including the authority to set and alter the date, the timing, the format, the voting mechanisms, the structure, and other logistical aspects of the convention outlined in the call. This authority includes, for example, changing the date from July 13th to August 17th, and all other actions that must be taken in order to ensure the safety of convention participants and the general public and compliance with any applicable laws, including but not limited to those concerning public health and ballot access. So this was a resolution that was passed by your representatives that took all of the power of the convention and handed it over to the planning committee.
And I don't know about you, but I have no idea who is on the Democratic National Convention Committee. So that's interesting. And look, there is a certain amount of practicality involved here. Like, this is a huge event. It's takes multi-million-dollar thing. There's immense planning involved, and so there should be a committee that is organizing and working out the logistics and all of these things. So I mean that I don't have a problem with, but the lack of transparency and the fact that like these sort of things, and I've seen this in other in my state and in other organizations, that these groups do stuff and it's just presented as already done. Like it's not up to the members. It's already been established. We've already done all this stuff. So and that is the reverse of what should have happened. So the rule that was used to pass this resolution is the bylaws were amended based on the following language. The chairperson of the National Committee may refer matters to the members of the National Committee for consideration and vote by mail, provided, however, that if members aggregating more than 20% of the full membership shall so request, the matter shall be presented at the next meeting of the National Committee. So since we can't have in-person meetings because of the pandemic, the chairman said, hey, we're just going to send this out by email and you guys can vote on it. And apparently nobody had any problem with that. So they do that. So classifying bylaws changes as, quote, matters to be voted on without debate is at best not good practice, but technically would be allowed. I think, and this will be kind of our recurring theme here, is that technically this stuff was, parliamentary speaking, all right, and kosher, democratically, small d, democratically speaking, this was at best not the best practice.
And even though we're saying that the bylaws were amended, what they really amended was the call of the convention, but they amended the call of the convention that took away rights that have been given to the convention members in the charter and the bylaws. So in my opinion, this was actually an invalid motion to be made in the first place.
Right. So sneaky.
This is also what they passed. As they said, the Rules Committee shall adopt the permanent rules of the convention and the convention agenda. So this is what we talked about in the last section. This is what you normally do at the beginning of the convention by the delegations. Select the permanent officers of the convention. So the Rules Committee is selecting those as well. Propose amendments, if any, to the charter of the Democratic Party of the United States for the convention's consideration. This is what we will be proposing tomorrow in the People for Democratic Party Reform are some resolutions that we will be submitting to the Rules Committee for consideration. And, if there was a God, they would show up on the convention floor for passage. And propose resolutions concerning any other matter not provided for in the permanent rules of the convention and not contained in the reports of other standing committees for the convention's consideration. So here's where all the power from the convention delegation to do this was handed over to the Rules Committee. And this is what your DNC members approved. And then it also says, no amendment to the charter of the Democratic Party shall be effective unless it is subsequently ratified by a vote of the majority of the entire membership of the Democratic National Committee. The adopted report of the Rules Committee may be amended upon the adoption by a majority of the convention delegates presented in voting of any minority report passed pursuant to Article 7.I.3.
So basically, the original call to the National Convention said that the Rules Committee will present for consideration the permanent rules of the convention and something about the officers of the convention. But now it's for the convention delegates to vote on, and they just kind of bypass that, and so those have the Rules and Bylaws Committee just propose these meetings and pass them themselves. No delegates required. So, democracy is just a whole lot of very inconvenient. So it's much easier if we just let the Rules and Bylaws Committee just take care of all that for us.
This is some other stuff that they passed. So this other article was deleted and replaced with the following language. The Credentials Committee shall determine and resolve questions concerning the seating of delegates and alternates to the convention pursuant to the resolution entitled Relationship between the 2020 Rules of Procedure of the Credentials Committee and the 2020 Delegate Selection Rules, which includes the Rules of Procedure of the Credentials Committee of the 2020 Democratic National Convention, hereby approved and adopted by the Democratic National Committee and set forth in full in the appendix of this call. So this is handing over the approval of the credentials to the Credentials Committee, not to the delegates of the convention. And in the next segment is where we're going to talk about how this has been an important step in the process in the past and has been controversial. So all this has been swept aside and done before the convention convenes as well.
Right. So again, don't want to have any of that inconvenient democracy where delegates actually get to vote on things because, COVID and all that. So the original language, again, was basically that the Credentials Committee will present this information and then it'll get approved by the delegation. And we're skipping that in effect. So it's a little bit frustrating to see this. So kind of jumping ahead here to how that resolution was passed. So that language was presented to the DNC by mail to the DNC members to vote on. So there was no debate, there was no amendments, there was no nothing. So there's rights, 2 and 3 taken away, and so it was, basically just right, yeah. And so it was just given to you if you were a DNC delegate and you were just left to your own devices to read it, to understand it, to see what it does, and then there was no mechanism for changing it or doing anything about it. And again, that's slightly problematic, but that's what happened. So
and it was written as a resolution, and there's a page of whereases wrapping this in COVID-19, blah blah blah, which, when you think about it, it doesn't mean that all of your rights has to be taken away from the convention just because it's going to be an electronic convention. So they've used the excuse of the pandemic to take away your rights.
Yeah.
So just to recap how your rights were removed, and this is looking at the bigger picture, the DNC chair was elected in 2017 by a margin of 35 votes, or the vote of 18 delegates. So if 18 delegates had voted the other way, we would not have had the current chair. The DNC chair has the right to appoint members to the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and that's what they did. There are no restrictions on or qualifications for who sits on that committee. They are completely appointed by the DNC chair. The Rules and Bylaws Committee drafted a resolution that violates the charter and removed power from the convention delegates and gave that power to the Rules and Bylaws Committee. And then your elected DNC delegates approved this resolution. And it was pretty much a gun to the head because of the language used to say that these changes were absolutely necessary because of the pandemic. And apparently a majority of them had bought that argument. So if you find this problematic, I would encourage you to, number one, identify who your DNC members are and have a conversation with them about what their right what their responsibilities are to the membership, and have a discussion with them about why no one stood up and objected to this. Because if anyone did, I would like to hear the story of it and give them a Medal of Freedom award, because I suspect that their actions were unique.
Well, and if I remember right, the vote approving these changes was like virtually was overwhelming. So that's neat that we don't want to have actual democracy in the Democratic Party. So here's how they did it technically. So since they were amending the call of the convention, which the Rules and Bylaws Committee writes the call. So they basically they own that document, and so they can amend it. So the Democratic National Committee, the DNC members, voted basically to instruct the RBC to change the language of the call of the convention. And technically that would be allowed. It's their document, they can change it. But you can't have the call conflicting with the charter, because the charter is the governing document. There's a hierarchy of documents. So while the RBC has the right to alter their document, they still can't approve changes that violate their governing document. Hopefully that's clear to everybody. So parliamentary speaking, they do have the right to change it, but what they changed it to was where the conflict comes in. And the way they did it, again, while it might be technically permitted in parliament, parliamentary speaking, democratically speaking, it was pretty crappy, in my opinion.
And this is where the outdated nature of Robert's Rules of Order sort of impedes our ability to call a point of order and say, point of order, that resolution conflicts with the charter, because there's been no meeting held where anyone could do that. And that, the original assumption is that whenever you have a meeting, you would make decisions together and you would have the ability to do this. And we had the same thing done to us in our own state, where the delegate selection plan was done outside of the state central committee. And we've reviewed the tapes where they claim that we were told about it. And it was done in such obscure language that no one heard it. The fundamental processes of a democracy is that these things are done in meetings, and then a majority gets to approve it after debate, and that it was totally bypassed.
Right.
And there's no ability to challenge it. That's the main point I was trying to make.
Well, and these are always or often couched in we have to do these things because of whatever, there's just no more time to debate or amend these things. That's what happened in our state with the delegate selection plan. It was approved 2 days before the deadline, and so they was like, no, we don't have time to make any changes. And they had scheduled a meeting of the state central committee a week after the deadline had passed. So it's like, what can you do? There's just nothing we could do. The deadline was done, and the meeting wasn't scheduled until after the deadline, conveniently. So that's the kind of things, the kind of weaponization of parliamentary procedure that really rubs me the wrong way. So to recap how your rights were removed, the resolution is invalid because resolutions can't conflict with the charter. And so the Article 2, Section 3 states that the National Convention shall adopt a platform. And then it also states the convention delegates act upon such matters as is deemed appropriate. But in this case, delegates are told that their participation would end on August 15th, 2 days before the convention, which now I would say is just a television program will actually occur.
So how do we prevent this from occurring in the future? No one's going to call the convention invalid and be successful because of these changes that were made to this year's convention. What we need to do is get leadership inside the party that respects the rights of the membership. So number one, we need to elect a DNC chair that respects the rights of Democrats in 2021. So in the beginning of next year, there will be a election for a DNC chair. Either the current one will run for re-election or someone else will challenge them, and we will have a choice. Between now and then, we need to elect DNC members and state chairs who believe that the Democratic Party is actually a grassroots organization, as described in the Section 1 of the Charter itself. And DNC members have already been elected in some states, but this is a process that will go on for the next couple of months. And so, you need to ask your candidates who are running as DNC members if they believe that in democracy, and make them swear that they do before you give them your vote. We need to make our DNC delegates accountable to the state delegates, not the DNC leadership. So when we elect delegates in our state to the Democratic National Committee, they are supposed to be representing us. They are not representing the leadership of the party. It's supposed to be a bottoms-up organization, not a top-down. And then what we will be considering tomorrow is a series of resolutions to amend the charter and the bylaws that will restore democracy to the fundamental way the party performs, so that they are accountable to the Democrats. And an example of that is the appointment of the members of the Rules and Bylaws Committee, which currently is there is no restraints on or guidelines for what the chair can do. And so what we will be proposing is that the members of these committees are elected from the state parties, and that will also ensure some level of geographic distribution across the United States, because if you look at the membership of the current Rules and Bylaws Committee, it's very East Coast centric, and it's hard to believe that many of them actually understand democracy and how rules should be written to protect democracy. They seem to be more politically motivated, and that's not how it should be, in my humble opinion. So, anything you'd like to add before we ask for questions, Carrie?
Just that, I know DNC delegates have been elected in some states already, but for the states that are remaining, it's really important to get some good people in there, and in numbers. I mean, I know we have in the past, and probably for this next round, have elected some great people, but if they are just, lonely voices in the wilderness, then that's not really very effective. Not to mention, it's really hard emotionally on the folks that are there and struggling in the trenches, and they don't have any kind of support. It's frustrating that the problem with a grassroots movement is, the stuff at the very top is always the last to change, because we're starting from the roots. So, you change your county parties, you change your, or however your state is structured, and work your way up to the state social committee and then up to the DNC. And so those DNC positions, those are going to be, the hardest to change in great number. But I think it's worth the struggle, and we'll just keep on working at it. And but the more people you get involved, the easier it is for those people who are already there. I know I personally, just as a personal anecdote, like when new people come in and get involved and they're all excited and gung-ho, like there is a small part of me that's a little bit resentful. It's like, where were you 2 years ago, or where were you 4 years ago? And I know that's not fair, but just emotionally speaking, like, support folks that are in there and fighting and, doing that work to lay groundwork for, the next level of change. So, questions?
I have to soapbox a little bit more before we go. So you remember that all of these, there are provisions for recalling officers. So if you find that you have elected DNC members who are not reflecting the will of the people, and certainly in your state, you can recall them. There is a process for recalling them, and it's also acknowledged in the bylaws of the DNC. So you can get them, and even if you're not successful, at least it puts them on notice. I'm a former DNC member, and I know firsthand that there are a lot of DNC members who just run for these positions, and they're automatically reelected, and they go to the DNC meetings quarterly, and they are just social gatherings. There's a series of meetings you go to, no business is enacted, and no one behaves as a representative. They are just basically attending a couple of meetings and catching up with their friends. But you need to elect DNC members who will go and then propose these resolutions, and then when they come up for a vote on the floor of the DNC, support them with their vote. And it is only by getting a majority, or when required, a 2/3 vote, that we will get these fundamental changes enacted. So having said that, let me unshare the slides, and Sonia, perhaps you could share some questions with us.
Absolutely. I will just say again, that particular segment seemed to bring up a lot of feelings for people. So yes. I'm just going to suggest a deep breath all around for everyone. I'm also going to say, Larry, it would appear that if you wanted to run for chair of the DNC, many people here would vote for you. Just saying. They seem to be starting to endorse you here. Okay, so one question, and I also just want to say in general, if I miss anything here in the chat box, and some of the questions are about credentialing and such, just know that we will cover those by the end of this day or convention to answer your questions about the details about registration and things. Here, this question, given the voting will occur in a couple of weeks, when should we expect to see a copy of the rules distributed? And I guess I would just tack on now, will it matter?
What do you think, Carrie?
So yes, you as a delegate should have a copy of the rules already. I'm betting, I haven't actually checked since I'm not a delegate, but I'm betting that they are posted somewhere, embedded in the DNC website. We'd probably have to go searching for them. And as for whether or not they matter, honestly, no, not really. Because at this point, like, the Rules and Bylaws Committee of the DNC has already decided how things are going to be, and they've removed your right and any opportunity for you to do otherwise. So, I mean, yeah, you can go and dig up a copy of the rules. Basically, just cross out any time that it says the delegates will vote or the delegates will decide, and just put in DNC or the RBC, and you got the idea. So, sorry, that's slightly pessimistic, but
I wanted to be on the Convention Rules Committee, but was not given that slot. It's my understanding that there is a final meeting of the Rules and Bylaws Committee for the convention on July 30th, and so I suspect that it will be sometime after the 30th that we will get the rules, because it is conceivable that they could change the rules to the convention at that meeting. So perhaps on the 31st or the beginning of August. But as Carrie said, there's nothing for the rules to govern, so I don't know what they would do or if it would matter.
And so in theory, you could pressure the Rules and Bylaws Committee and try and get them to enact some decent changes. But given that they're using the pandemic as a justification for all of these sweeping changes, I find it kind of unlikely that you'll get much traction. But again, these days I'm really a pessimist, so it's worth the effort. If you've got the time and the resources to pursue it, then start contacting those RBC members and see if you can get anywhere. So
I tried to find out who they were, and I was first told that well, there's rules against us releasing that information. I said, well, show me the rule. And they go, well, it's not really a rule. I don't want to make my peers uncomfortable. And it's like,
Oh,
I'm really sorry that they would feel uncomfortable, but they are supposed to be representing us, the people, in spite of the fact that they're appointed by the DNC chair. And I need to have access to them so I can lobby them with my other peers, so that they get feedback and can, as a representative of us, make a correct decision.
and it's really problematic, democratically speaking. This is small d democracy here, that your elected or appointed, in this case, representatives are not public information. Like I find that concerning. Like that is really kind of antithetical to a democratic process. If we're supposed to be in a representative democracy and we don't have any way to contact our representatives, then how are they representing us? Just puzzling.
Next question.
Here's one we might be able to work with anyway. What is the most important work we can do with regards to reforming the Democratic Party in between elections and conventions?
Well, the DNC can amend the bylaws at any of their meetings, and we went through the prior notice requirements earlier. So these documents can be amended, and what we will be considering tomorrow are 5 changes to the bylaws and charter, which do exactly that. And these address some of the most egregious areas where power has been taken away from the people and given to, like, the DNC chair. So one of them addresses who votes at the National Convention. I mean, why should anyone vote who's not an elected delegate from their state? The whole handing out wholesale of votes to people because of some other position that they hold is not pure representative democracy, and nor is the awarding of delegates to states that have later primaries. I mean, that just sort of skews the whole representational model. So that's one. Making the standing committees elected as opposed to appointed is a key one. And, we might end up with a bunch of establishment people who are going to do what the leadership wants, even if we enact this, but at least it was our choice to do that. And, that's how democracy plays out. But currently we have no control over who gets appointed to those committees. We have one for creating the position of an advocate, because these rules for getting anything challenged inside the committee are very Byzantine and arcane, and you usually find your way through it by trial and error. So we would like to see a position created to help people make challenges. We have further defined recourses for people in states who find their state leadership has been behaving egregiously, and it prescribes a method for coming up with a plan of action. And if they don't correct their behavior, they get a reorganization called on them. So those are the kinds of things that we will be considering tomorrow. And the hope is that all of us together can lobby the Rules Committee and our DNC members to get these passed on the floor. It's a Hail Mary, but we have to start somewhere. Next question.
So a majority of DNC members can completely override anything the delegates to the convention want to do, right? I think you've answered that one. This year, anyway. Yeah, no.
That's what they've done.
Yeah. It's a little bit, because of the hierarchy of documents. In this instance, the majority of DNC members are preemptively overriding the will of the convention.
Okay. So another question, being on the credentials committee is now a moot thing. We're meeting on July 31st.
No, I would say it's not moot. because so you, as the credentials committee, could still challenge the credentials of delegations. It's going to be harder to contest it because just the numbers are smaller, I think. But I wouldn't say that it's invalidating. It's just not going to be, so the credentials report won't be approved by the delegation as a whole. It's just going to be approved internally. So I would say in some ways it's more important to be vigilant on the credentials committee because you're going to see all their inner workings and like, hey, that doesn't seem right. So it's going to be more important in some respects that you speak up and, ask questions and, make waves and be like, hey, why are we doing this way? Or why are we approving this when X, Y, and Z wasn't done? And, whatever. So I would say that it's actually the other way around. It's more important if you're on the credentials committee to be paying attention and to be asking questions and offering challenges if you think it's appropriate.
And it is possible
that check.
Yeah, it is possible that a delegation could be challenged because there were a lot of rules violations that occurred this year in the selection of the delegates. And, given the current environment, it's unlikely that anyone could, but it is possible that someone could file a challenge to the delegation. So you would be weighing in on those decisions. Next question.
When you say DNC delegates, this person asks, you mean the committee woman and the committee man, right?
It depends on how many you get in your state. So there are 200 DNC members that are allocated based on, I believe it's a formula based on who voted in the last 3 presidential elections for the Democratic president. So there is a large group coming from California. In our state, we have 5 DNC delegates. It's the chair and the first vice chair plus 3 elected at large. If you're a state with a very small population, then you would get less. And I'm not absolutely sure. I think the minimum is 1 male and 1 female in a state. So it's kind of like the House. There's like a minimum per state. But yeah, it's those people that we elect at the state to represent us on the Democratic National Committee. And of course, you know who those are.
Okay. Next question. Are the vote counts and results on the changes passed earlier available to the public?
They're supposed to be. They're also supposed to be public documents, and they're signed votes. So interestingly, votes within the DNC are signed, so you can find out how your people voted for them.
Yeah, there are no secret ballots in the DNC at any level. So.
Okay. Can someone run for the DNC if they know nothing about bylaws, procedures, committees, etc.? It seems daunting and inaccessible by design.
Well, clearly the answer is yes, because of the multiple examples we have.
And no, you don't have to have any prior experience or a special knowledge. If you need the expertise of a parliamentarian, then seek out a parliamentarian. But common sense is going to get you a long ways, and also just because the leadership tells you that something is so doesn't make it so. And I mean, I think that's a huge problem in the Democratic Party, is that a lot of Democrats are just willing to go along with whatever the leadership is proposing. It's very top down as opposed to bottoms up.
And as I said earlier, because go ahead.
I was just going to say, as long as you are looking at it from the bottom up, like you are a representative, you are serving the people that elected you, not the leadership at the DNC. And so I think if you keep that in mind and make decisions based around that that's going to keep you going in the right direction.
And as I mentioned earlier, because we've been in this distorted democracy for so long, many of us do not understand what our rights are. And so at least reading the book, Robert's Rules of Order in brief, so you understand what your rules, your rights are, would be fundamentally very helpful. so that when you get a ballot, like our DNC members did earlier, you would know what you have available to you to contest it, on what so you could do something. So you don't just read it and say, oh, pandemic, I must vote yes. We need people who think.
Right.
So we have a couple questions. Again, recurring theme: is it possible to remove the chair, impeach the chair, kill the chair? A lot of questions about that.
Well, there is a procedure for removal of the chair, and it would be a recall by the DNC members. The current term is going to be up, so at this point in time, I don't think it's where you should put your energy. The energy really should be put in electing DNC members, so then when they elect the next one, we get a good DNC chair. That's my recommendation on where you should invest your energy.
And I know, because I share this frustration, like it always seems like we're always playing catch up, and we're always having to react to something that has, gone wrong. Like, we have a crappy chair, so can we remove him? And I echo what Larry said, that at this point in the term, like this, like my answer might have been different right after he was elected in 2017, but in 2020, at the in the latter half of 2020, when he's going to be replaced in a few months, putting your efforts into trying to recall him at this point is not really worth the effort. It's going to be much more effective to work on getting a new chair, which means new DNC members, and making changes with charter and bylaws so that the entire process is more democratic and laying that groundwork. And while that's not as satisfying as impeaching the chair or removing the chair, emotionally, in the long run, it's going to lead to a healthier democracy, hopefully.
That's also a perfect segue into the question someone else had: how do we elect DNC members?
Every state has its own process. So you need to find your state's bylaws and see what they have governing that. Hopefully the process is outlined. I know it is in our bylaws and in our standing rules. If there's nothing that covers this, then the default authority is the Robert's Rules of Order. So that tells you how to nominate and elect people and recall them, if there's not language that supersedes that in your bylaws. The first thing you need to know is what is the date of the election. So ours is at the end of December. I know California has already done theirs. You need to find out in your state when it is, so you know when you have to find candidates to even run. What usually happens is that you show up at a meeting and it's like, oh, we're electing delegates today. Darn, I wish I had known that. I would have found someone to run. You have to get ahead of the curve and prepare for these things, because if you don't plan, you're probably not going to be successful.
Don't always assume that it is the chair, electing a new chair is the answer. Probably Perez and all of your chairs start out initially, they're pretty democratic. But after a period of time, they find out that they can get things done quicker if they short circuit the system. And it isn't that they're necessarily evil people. They just find there's convenience and expediency. And there are times when you have to take a few shortcuts. But the problem is, and I wrote this about power corruption, once you start having power corruption, it is the worst form, because that becomes the new norm. And then pretty soon you go from there. So don't just assume that no matter, gosh, nice Sally was elected chair, she won't do any of these things. She won't do anything the first hour or two, or the first year maybe, but after a while they'll start taking the same shortcuts, because they find out. And I always say that members' rights are not a convenience. It is very inconvenient to go through process to allow every member to speak and things like this. But don't just think we'll elect a new chair and that will solve all the problems. It won't. You still have to hold their feet to the fire. And as far as being a parliamentarian, all of us have to be our own parliamentarians. No matter how much whether you got 6 parliamentarians up there, because you're the ones that should know the rules to protect your rights, and you need to emphasize it. And you can do this by buying those books and knowing what those rights are, and then pounding on the table till you get your rights. And if you're not on the bad guy list by your 3rd meeting, you're doing something wrong. So.
And for those who were not at the earlier meeting, that distended voice is Tom Helveka, who's a professional registered parliamentarian with the National Association of Parliamentarians and is our parliamentarian for this weekend. So thank you, Tom. I think we have time for about 2 more questions.
Okay. And I would also add to that last statement, join this group, because this group is all about teaching you how to navigate this whole process. So one question, will we know what we will be voting on prior to the convention? I assume when the ballots come, we will know what we're voting on. Is that correct?
Well, I went to one of the seminars for delegates, and I asked the question, was there anything else that we would be voting on other than the president and the vice president? And the answer was no. Now, I don't know if this person really knew what the situation was, but that's what I was told. So I'm at this point assuming that I'm going to get a ballot, and there's going to be the candidates to vote for, and for the president and for the vice president, and that's where I'll be able to check my box. I'm a pledged candidate, so I will be voting for the candidate that I'm pledged for, and so my role in this is pretty automatic because there probably will not be a second round of voting. So I don't expect the ballot to extend beyond that.
Okay.
Final question.
Okay. And just to say, if we missed any, please write, we'll answer. How can people who identify themselves as independents participate in primaries to help determine candidates?
Depends on your state. And how your state handles people who are not aligned with the party. There's a number of parties, and it's in the double digits, that do not have the concept of party registration. So Washington is one of them. So you can't actually count up the number of Democrats in the state because you sort of declare your party when you vote. In another state like ours, we have the ability to open up the Democratic primary, and it's in the bylaws of the Democratic Party of Oregon. We can open up the primary to non-affiliated voters on a one-time basis and allow them to come and vote. So you have to look at your state laws and how those are handled both in the state law and in the party rules. That's the end of our questions. Yeah, if there are other questions that you need answered, you're always welcome to email me. And my email is lawrence.d@taylor@gmail.com. You can, if you are a Democrat and you're interested in reform of the Democratic Party, by all means, join People for Democratic Party Reform, because only by us working together can we affect these kinds of changes. So thank you all for attending that. And I believe we are now at the top of the hour, so we will go to our third segment, which is a discussion of conventions past. Did you need a break, Carrie, or should we forge on?
I'm good. We can keep going.
Okay. So let me share my screen, and then we're going to bring on Leslie. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi. Glad to be here.
For those who have not attended the previous two, my name is Larry Taylor. I'm the president of People for Democratic Party Reform, and I will be chairing the convention tomorrow. I have with me two co-presenters today. I have Carrie Capon. Say hi, Carrie.
Hi.
Carrie is a parliamentarian studying to become a registered parliamentarian. I am a professional registered parliamentarian, having gone through the battery of tests to attain that level. And then we have Leslie. So say hello, Leslie.
Hi.
And Leslie is here because she was the co-chair of the Credentials Committee for the infamous Nevada delegate selection process of 2016. So if you haven't seen the videos, go to YouTube and check them out, because it was wild. And so what this segment is about is how conventions have been more meaningful in the past. So what we've talked about today, the first segment was about conventions as they are defined in the parliamentary authority and how most conventions operate. The second section was what has changed and what are the rights of delegates in the current convention for 2020. And so this is a section talking about how there were more significant things that happened in the past, and then what happens when the convention rules are not written properly and things break, and sort of how things fall apart. All of these are being recorded as well as being live streamed. So if you missed them, you'll be able to go back and see any segment of this, and we'll break them up into the 1 hour segments, so you don't have to sit through 2 hours of video to get to the third hour. So you're always welcome to view these on YouTube later. So this is about when conventions mattered. If you're like me, you watched conventions happen when you were a kid. You would see the demonstrations on the convention floors, and it was actually pretty amazing watching what went on, and then to actually go to my first convention and be on the actual convention floor. So from 60 years ago, this is a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, which I thought was just amazing. She says, "I feel still that to select the standard bearer of a party in an atmosphere of noise, bands, and balloons, to the accompaniment of manufactured and synthetic excitement of parades, is to strip one of the most important features of our system of its dignity and meaning." And she said this 60 years ago.
Wow.
So that was Eleanor Roosevelt on what was going on then. So I was just reviewing the history of conventions, and we came across a couple of them where things were actually happened on the convention floor. So in 1884, on the first day of the convention, delegates from Tammany Hall, New York's political machine, attempted to break the unit rule, which bound all delegates to their state convention and mandated that they voted as a unit. Tammany Hall was not the greatest democratic organization, but this is where they actually tried to do something good, and so there was a fight over the rules and they were trying to disallow the unit rule. So this was presumably brought up during the debate over the convention rules at the beginning, and even though their challenge to the rules to break the unit rule was defeated, it was still something that was brought up before the convention and debated and voted on by the delegation.
So fast forwarding here to 1964, there was a couple of contentious issues. I would imagine that most people know what was going on in 1964, and so just generally with the civil rights movement and all of that. So Emma Sanders brought an end to the segregated delegations because she filed a challenge against the all-white delegation from Mississippi. And they presented basically two delegations, one that was segregated and one that was not. And so they should, so that was challenged, and that the regular state organization should be repudiated, and that its patronage should be cut off, and that it should be denied representation at the convention. And so they did that. So that's, the very first thing, that committee, the Credentials Committee report, where you challenge the credentialing of a delegation. That's pretty impressive. So then the other big fight in 1964 was over the platform. There was a plank in the civil rights about civil rights, talking about school desegregation plans, and one of the senator from North Carolina wanted to delete several portions of the plank about school desegregation, and got those motions defeated, and the entire plank was approved. And this was, televised live on TV. Future member of Congress Patsy Mink from Hawaii gave a speech before 10,000 delegates and a national television audience, and got that defeated. So there is historical precedence for the national conventions actually acting and behaving as an actual convention. But I would say in recent years it's gotten much more to be about the pageantry and just a big show to cheerleading on whoever the chosen nominee is, and that's not what democracy actually is. So it's so hopefully, I had hopes for this convention that delegations could reassert their rights, but that, as we outlined in our last hour, was kind of circumvented preemptively.
For those of you who have been watching Veep in the seventh season, Selena says to her daughter, "Oh, the platform is just a list of things that we're not going to do," which is unfortunately the cynical perspective that you see often. But as we said earlier, the platform, along with the nomination of the president and the vice president, are things that are articulated in the charter of the Democratic Party that you do at the convention. So, people like to say that the platform isn't enforceable, but really it is the belief of the Democratic Party. And in reading the history of the Democratic Party, you could see the shift around 1900 from supporting things which would make me uncomfortable to shifting and supporting more progressive things inside the party plan. So, I believe that these things are important and that they're worth fighting over, and what people want to do in improving the platform for this year should be supported. In the 1968 convention, there was, this is where they finally did abolish the unit rule. And it's so cool because you can read in the bylaws of the Democratic Party where the unit rule is banned. So this was not only approved for the convention, but they modified the language inside the governing documents of the Democratic Party to abolish its use in the future. So, for us to be sidelined like this is really disappointing. So now we're going to talk about what happened in Nevada. And before we get into the discussion, I'll just show two pictures for you. This is one of my favorite. This was, as Leslie will describe, the convention went on for something like 18 hours. And this was one of the scenes. It was absolute pandemonium. And then this is the very disturbing final scene of the convention where they brought in the police and they had to, prevent the duly elected delegates from storming the podium or whatever they thought they were going to do. So let me unshare.
Really quick, before Leslie gets going on her story, the videos that came out of the 2016 state delegate selection convention, that was actually what kind of prompted me to become a parliamentarian and join the National Association of Parliamentarians. I literally cried with just rage when I watched those videos. Like, it was appalling. And I had already, gone down the parliamentary road. I had, vague recollections from high school about parliamentary procedure, and I was like, that was not right. And the more that I found out about what had happened, the less right that it was. But that was really kind of the tipping point for me anyway, and what prompted me to seek out, to head down the parliamentary path and start parliamenting about things and whatnot, because that was just such an egregious anti-democratic process that, I knew that something needed to be done. So.
Well, welcome, Leslie. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what your role was in 2016 and what happened?
Well, first of all, I want to say a word about the state convention in Nevada in 2016. There were no chairs thrown. Just get that out of the way. There was a chair raised, but somebody pulled it down. From the beginning, I mean, even before the gavel went down and the rules were issued, there were clues that this was not going to be a democratic convention. Always in the past, our state conventions were all day Saturday and half a day Sunday. The new rules for 2016 was it was one day only, and it just happened to coincide with, and was held in Las Vegas, happened to coincide with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas graduation, the same day, same hours, and same hotels. So there was virtually no parking to be found. And apparently the Clinton campaign knew this, and they had people meet at like good 10 miles away in a parking lot, and they bust them in. So setting the stage for that. The rules, upon first reading, it was apparent that there was not going to be democracy because we were to vote the platform up or down. There was to be no discussion, no debate, no amendments. And the same thing for the rules. No discussion, no amendment. It was up or down. So what this did is it created a mindset in at least half of the delegates that they were not going to get a fair shake and they were not going to have their voices heard. So there was a lot of anger just underlying everything. As far as the Credentials Committee was concerned, it was appointed by the state chair to be 5 members, or 5 Sanders supporters and 5 Clinton supporters, and to have 2 co-chairs, myself representing the Sanders delegates, and a person who was a Clinton supporter, but also a member of the DNC at large. So obviously the deck had been stacked all along. The state party set up an email address just for the Credentials Committee that anyone in the counties who didn't receive their letter acknowledging that they were a delegate to the state convention could write a letter, an email to, and we would take up as something to resolve. And those kinds of things were resolved in more or less Zoom meetings at the time with the whole 10-member committee, and basically was chaired by this DNC member who was a co-chair, and I was not allowed much voice at all. She really dominated, put it that way. So our credentials problems and challenges were 99% came out of Clark County, the largest county in Nevada, representing Las Vegas and the surrounding areas. And the rules of our delegate selection plan, and by the way, we are a caucus state. The rules of our delegate selection plan says that you must be present at the caucus, you must be elected to your county convention, you must attend your county convention and be elected to the state convention, you must be seated at the state convention to be elected as a national delegate. And Clark County began telling their people, well, we're going to have, I think it was like 4 days of pre-registration for the county convention. And all you have to do is show up, get registered, and get credentialed for this county convention and be issued a badge. You don't even have to show up at the county convention. So a lot of people just didn't, but they put their name into nomination to be delegates to the state convention, and the county party allowed that, and many of them were elected to be state delegates. That was the basis of 99% of our problems. We had a couple of instances where we couldn't check their voter registration because we didn't know, we just had names. We didn't have addresses or any other identifying information, and they had exact same names, very common names. So that further hindered us and took some digging to identify people. Let's see, I have some notes here. We had about a month leading up to the convention to deal with those individual problems, and it was necessary to go back to Clark County paper records to verify that someone had actually attended their caucus and attended their county convention. Funny thing, the records were lost, misplaced, not available. So that further complicated things. The credentials committee, the convention was held on a Saturday, and the credentials committee met in person in Las Vegas starting in the mid-afternoon of Friday and went all the way to 1:30 in the morning trying to resolve these problems. And at 1:30 in the morning, the state Clinton director came in with a list of 63 names challenging their right to be seated, most of whom were Sanders delegates. Funny thing. We were
at 1:30 in the morning?
1:30 in the morning, Saturday morning. And we were just toast by then. So we agreed to meet at 6:30 in the morning to resolve these issues. Well, nobody got any sleep. We were all so keyed up. And so we come in bleary-eyed again at 6:30 trying to resolve these problems. And most of them were denied, and because one of the 5 people who was a Sanders delegate voted with the Clinton delegates almost all the time. So we had a list of these 63 names. I was approached, first of all, I put myself in nomination to be a national delegate. And we had the convention floor was chaos the couple times I went there to see what was happening. I went looking for we gave an initial credentials report giving numbers. Then we went back to our committee room and we're locked up in there with all this work to do. And we finally came to a final credentials report. So the 2 co-chairs went to the podium to give this committee report. So the Clinton co-chair gave the report, and then thinking it was all over, I grabbed the microphone and I said, I want to give a minority report. And the minority report, by the way, had been written by the Sanders campaign, an attorney for them, and signed by all of 4 out of the 5 Bernie representatives on the credentials committee. And it basically said there were 63 people that we were quite unsure of because of the haste and the process. Well, I went back to the committee room, and the other committee members were outraged that I would give a minority report, and they said that it confused the delegates because I was talking about minorities, and that's why people got so upset on the floor, because I said that minorities were prevented from voting and being credentialed. It was just nuts. But while I was at the podium, the chair, and you see this on the YouTube video, the chair, Roberta Lang, said to me, I told you you can't give a minority report. And that's why you'll see my outrage, like, you did not say that to me. I told you I was going to give it, and you didn't say anything. Because there had been a staff room, and that's where I met her during the breaks, and I told her I was going to give this minority report. So I was shocked, and people started chanting, "Let her speak, let her speak." And finally, another DNC member at large came up and said, "My name is Andres Ramirez, and as a DNC member, I have some authority here, and I say let her speak." So I was able to give the minority report. And the Rules Committee chairman had told me to my face, on the podium, with his finger in my face, "You're stupid. we don't go by Robert's rules here, which was, obvious. So, by the way, the rules said nothing, yay or nay, about a minority report. So in those kind of cases, Robert's rules should prevail. Am I right, Larry?
Correct.
Okay. So he was violating Robert's rules. So anyway, I was able to give the report, and it caused a lot of chaos. And Roberta Lang, the chair, and then I left. Backing up, I left the podium. I went, and they had a break, and they were dividing into district caucuses to elect their national delegates. And I went to my district caucus and removed my name for consideration to be a national delegate, because I didn't want to be seen as grandstanding up there with a minority report in order to be known and to be seen and all that. So I thought it was best that I withdraw my name for consideration. So Roberta Lang claimed to have received some threatening telephone calls, threatening her life and the life of her family. So that's why she called in the sheriff's department, and that you see that in that first picture that you showed with them all lined up. Well, of course, that further increased the anger of 50% of the delegates. And oh, by the way, at some point after the minority report was given and the final credentials report, most of the Clinton delegates left because there was a 5 o'clock bus to take them back to their cars. So most of the delegates that were left were Sanders delegates. And so the anger was more apparent. So those are just, I guess that's all I really have to say about it, and that credentials are extremely important, and the process leading up to our state convention was flawed and disrespected, so that we had a much tougher time with what we were charged to do. So I think that the credentials is extremely important all along the process.
And to exacerbate things, there wasn't any. I heard there was no food provided
No,
for
there
an
wasn't.
18-hour meeting.
Yeah. No food.
And so you had people with low blood sugar. That also exacerbated the issue.
Yeah, there was a snack bar not too far, but I don't know if any of you have ever tried to get food from or any kind of drink from a snack bar in a casino. They rob you blind. It's horrible. So this, yeah, that was another problem. Yeah. And I think your example about Alabama was so instructive to us, that when we make our process truly democratic, we make our party a party that people want to join.
Right.
And making our party more democratic is only going to be good for us.
What I love about this is that you can look at the effects of people knowing that their rights are being taken away, and unfortunately they don't know the levers to pull to get them back, or when Roberta Lang is doing something inappropriate, or how to call her on that. And so, you really need a half dozen parliamentarians running around the floor to help people that are unfamiliar with these things, because it really is about protecting your rights inside of these meetings.
And one of the other rules said that the rule of the chair shall be final.
No, so that's a bad rule.
Yeah, so there was no appealing anything.
So anything you'd like to add before we open up the floor to questions?
No.
Do we have any questions, Leslie or Sonia?
Yeah. Well, how about this one? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, just checking. In the extreme unlikelihood that Joe Biden steps down, how would the balloting work for a new nominee? I guess a good general question is there any way to get another nominee at the convention?
Well, there will be a number of nominees on the ballot, because we have people that are pledged to Warren, and I think there's delegates pledged to Pete, and then we have something like 1,094 plus delegates pledged to Sanders. So all those votes will be cast. Like I'm bound to cast for the candidate for whom I'm pledged. So it's not like we're going to get a ballot and there's only one name for the president on there. Since we're all bound by, except for the unpledged delegate, well, no, only the pledged delegates vote in the first round. And so they will vote for the candidates for whom they're pledged. And so I would expect that Warren would get votes, and Pete would get votes, and Sanders would get votes, and Biden would get votes. And if Biden drops off, then he's just dropping off the ballot. And so they could vote for the remaining candidates. And then the nominee who gets the majority number of votes then is the nominee of the party.
Okay. Another question, assuming we throw some weight behind resolutions at the PDPR convention tomorrow, how do we utilize the power in numbers of delegates who are not attending this meeting?
We have to contact them and talk to them. It's a heavy lift, but we have to be optimistic about this, and that there is a majority out there who really would like democracy to be imbued in the Democratic Party. And there's people that just are top down, think that their role is to follow orders. It's a heavy lift to convince those people to come and vote with us, but there are many people who are unaware of what is going on. And certainly I was unaware of what happened at DNC meetings before I attended my first one. I thought, the chair of our party called me into a conference room after I was elected, and they said, "So what is it that you think you want to do as a DNC member?" And I said, well, I told him some of the things that I thought I could contribute. And he said, well, that'll be very interesting to see if you can do any of that. And what he knew was that it was basically a social organization, and that all the channels for doing things were pretty much blocked off, including the meetings themselves, which, you spend 30 minutes watching a parade of the colors, and then you get at the introductory speeches of the officers, and it goes on and on and on. And if you're lucky, there's some beef inside the meeting for you to actually vote on. But for most of the meetings I attended, there was actually nothing to vote on. We need to convince those people that they have power and that they need to join the movement to restore democracy to the Democratic Party. And it's through personal networking, which we have varying degrees of success at. What we found out over the past couple of years is that going in with your spears and torches and presenting yourself as a revolutionary is not as effective as moving into these different positions and being there to help and further the goals of the Democratic Party and sort of embracing them with love. And so I would encourage you to have, positive conversations with all of your people who have voting ability to cast their votes inside of these things. We can't go into a meeting and have the first time they see a resolution to have the standing committee members elected, seeing that for the first time. They need to be prepped in advance, so they're anticipating that vote. And when the vote happens, we've done our vote counting and we know we can win. It's just democracy. And, like everything in democracy, you don't win unless you have the votes.
Okay, and I would say send them to the PDPR website, pdpr.org. Is there any news coverage, et cetera, link to a story on this that we can share to highlight this democratic injustice?
Well, we issue press releases, and I will be doing one after the convention tomorrow. Hopefully the resolutions will be passed, and so we can do the story there. Anyone who wants to work on the disseminating the information is more than welcome to help me with that. I would recommend going to PDPR and becoming a member and signing up for the communications committee, so we know that this is something that you're interested in doing. In these days, it is so difficult to get a message out and to get recognized for what you're trying to do. But if we're persistent at this and we keep at it, we will be successful. So yes, we will be issuing a press release, and if you want to help circulate it, like if you're BFFs with Jimmy Dore or Any of the podcasters, the Young Turks, any of those people, you could give them a heads up and give us some creds, so that when we do send them the stuff, that they recognize it as being sincere and valid.
Okay. Are statewide at-large delegates who were elected as Sanders supporters but are technically Biden delegates because of the rule that statewide delegates are forfeited by candidates who drop out, pledged to Biden or Bernie on the first ballot?
Well, certainly New York has made this ambiguous, and I don't know where they came out on that. But in Oregon, that statement. So before we had our election in my state, they had issued the statement that we would be able to vote for, and Sanders would be able to keep any delegates, at-large delegates that he was allocated for based on the vote. If your state did not acknowledge that agreement between the Biden campaign and the Sanders campaign, then that's a problem, and you should have protested that earlier. It should be clear on who you are pledged to going into the convention if you are a pledged delegate, because that was the only way you got there. If you were pledged to Sanders, you are still pledged to Sanders. And in fact, in my state, I'm bound to vote for Sanders because that's who I was pledged to when I was elected. And it's my understanding that the delegates who were pledged to Warren still have to vote for Elizabeth Warren on the first ballot, and those delegates who were pledged to Pete have to vote for him as well. And I believe Bloomberg actually got a delegate, so they have to cast their vote for Bloomberg as well.
For the first two rounds in our state. If
in our state, we're bound for 2 rounds. Theoretically, it's not going to go past 1 round because a candidate will have a majority and it won't go to a second round. Next question.
Can you confirm the exit poll discrepancy? Is the question.
You mean someone took an exit poll and they disagreed with how the delegate counts showed up?
Not sure.
No, unfortunately, and you never know if the exit polls were conducted in a statistically methodical way. So the problem with statistics is you don't know how they were collected and you don't know how valid they are. I mean, look at how many polls said that Hillary was going to win in 2016, right? So no, we don't know. Next question.
How do we get our rights back?
Well, we have to elect people who want them back. And the Democratic Party structure is very, very complicated. So in my state, it starts at the county level. You run as a precinct committee person, and this is called different things in different states, but that is where it starts. So you have, in my state, we have elected representatives into the Democratic Party at the county level, and they belong to the county organization. The county organization elects delegates to the state organization, and the state organization is what elects, in my state, is what elects delegates to the Democratic National Committee. So in theory, it is a representative democracy. And so if we started at the lowest level and elected progressive people who demanded democracy, starting at the bottom all the way up, we would get that. And it's a heavy lift, even I don't even have a big state, like a state like Texas, which has triple digits in counties. I only have 36 counties to deal with. Organizing 36 counties is a Herculean task in itself. But that's what we need to do. And until a broader group of people understand that as Democrats, the Democratic Party belongs to them and that they can join up and affect change, we will not get change.
Okay. And as I scroll down I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I
Carrie.
was going to add that I think a lot of people don't realize how badly eroded the Democratic Party and the democratic process and the Democratic Party has become. And at least I know here in our state that there is, a certain percentage of state central committee delegates who are perfectly fine with how things are. They show up, they treat it as a social club, and then they pat themselves on the back for being such good Democrats. They aren't really interested in enacting actual change or in actually, making a difference. And so unless you get people into the organizations that are interested in doing those things, and then who are also willing to fight and do, the necessary, Tom said earlier that, power isn't given, it has to be taken. And if you don't have folks who are willing to step up and do that, then, you're not going to get very far.
And the process starts now. It's going on now.
Right.
We will have our county reorganization where we elect our delegates to the state central committee in November. But every county has probably set its own date. So it's a lot of data to track. We've done that here. We know now when all of the counties are reorging, and we know our target dates for lining up candidates. And so this is just basic data campaigning 101 that you have to do. But you have to know what positions you need to fill first in order to then find candidates to fill them. So start now.
And those were great answers, but I need to correct something because as I scrolled down the question box, I saw he was actually specifically asking about Nevada and wanted to
Leslie.
know that was directed at Leslie. Yes, specifically the exit poll for Nevada in 2016 is what he was asking about.
I have no knowledge of the exit poll. Sorry.
Another, again, question. Basically, is there any chance Bernie could wind up being the nominee? Is there anything we can do at the convention? Is there, I think, any way that might happen?
Well, things happen and people drop out of races. So that's one obvious way. I mean, if there's something that happens so that the current candidate who is going into the convention with a majority of delegates, if something happens to that delegate, then the remaining delegates will be voted on. So that's the one path legally that I'm aware of. Can you think of anything else, Carrie or Tom?
I don't think I can't think of any other ways that I suppose I can't think of any ways really that it could happen. I mean, miracles could occur and things could, if things significantly change, and as we all have learned this year, things can significantly change like that. Mm-hmm. But as things stand now, I don't see any path for it. So, unfortunately.
Does PDPR assist or endorse young progressive candidates for local positions, or is one better suited to contact Justice Dems or our revolution?
Yeah, that is not in the mission of People for Democratic Party reform. So we're focusing on reforming the bylaws of the Democratic Party itself, because that's where we believe that you're gonna affect permanent change and where the current flaws in the party exists. So other groups will take care of that.
And I don't think, there's other groups that are doing that. You can't expect just results when the process isn't just. So by focusing on the processes, how the parties are run, how, at the county, state, and national level, that's where you can make sure that you end up with just outcomes if you've got just processes. So, that's one of the reasons why I like PDPR is that, I'm a process kind of a person. I'm a rules-minded person. So, if you can get those processes in place, then I think that opens the door to progressive candidates that are being supported by other organizations.
Here's one. In 2016 DNC in Philly, I often wondered what pledged delegates actually voted for, if they voted for the candidate they were pledged for. So this person is saying she tried to get the list and basically got the runaround, so wants to know, where can I see the final list?
So there's rules and there's undocumented rules. And we've been having this fight locally. There seems to be this whole body of undocumented rules which people are carrying around in their heads that they use to suppress information for whatever reason or another. Undocumented rules don't really exist. Those are, in parliamentary terms, customs. And so if you have a rule that supersedes a custom, then the rule goes into effect. If there is some question about whether a rule is valid, you can make a point of order in one of your meetings, and what the chair should do, if there is no clear answer, put the question to the assembly and they would decide. What very interesting thing happened in Los Angeles, they were charging $2,000 to get contact information for people who will be voting in their county reorganization. I mean, that was just egregious. I mean, that crosses everyone's political alignments when you find out that kind of thing has been going on. And we talked about what you could do, and apparently at the end of the meeting, there was an opportunity for doing new business, and someone made a motion that the list be made free, and that anyone who paid for the list in the current election be reimbursed. And I heard that it caused quite an interesting debate, but the resolution passed, and so that is now in effect. And so that's what you have to do every time you get a leadership who thinks their responsibility is to suppress your right to talk with your fellow delegates or your representatives and get that information. I mean, it's just appalling that we have this culture that allows this to happen. And so you just have to combat it one rule at a time.
So, and in this particular instance, if you were a delegate to the 2016 National Convention, like your role ended when the convention was gavel closed. So your recourse now would be to have someone from your state who is a DNC member request that information on your behalf, because they as DNC members should have the right to see it. It should be public by the bylaws, but in this instance, it's, and that way they could in theory make a motion in a DNC meeting saying, "Hey, I request this information," and and go from there. And then, I mean, it might end up being a longer fight, having to change rules and do all that stuff. But that's probably, like in that specific case, that's probably your best avenue, is to get someone, a DNC member, to make that request on your behalf.
Okay. This person is wondering what they can do to basically help educate people on everything you're talking about. So basically wants to know what we can do to help with communications, press releases, etc., of a lot of the things we've been talking about.
Oh, again, just go to pdpr.org and sign up to become a member and let us know what you're interested in doing, and then we will get you integrated into it. We currently have representation from 37 states, which is pretty incredible. So there's only 13 states left and a couple of territories. And we have 18 of the top 20 most populous states. So we have representation inside of PDPR. And what's very interesting about that is that our membership is a lot of existing DNC members and a lot of existing members to the state central committees. And so we have people who have standing to go to these meetings and do things like, point of information or point of order. And I move that, this resolution to do such and such. We have people who can go into each one of those states and do that. The challenge is educating people on what their rights are and their abilities to do these things, and give them the materials on which to change. I'm very much interested in working with states who have overly repressive bylaws on what changes need to be made in those to restore power to the people. and we'd be glad to do that. But it starts with joining PDPR. I would love to have the organization have representation in all 50 states and all of the territories, and not just one person, but multiple people, because it's going to take a huge effort of us working together to affect these changes.
Okay. Does changing the Democratic Party's bylaws have any impact on the party and or DNC actually following the bylaws? Is there a difference between the Democratic Party's bylaws and the DNC's bylaws?
No, the Democratic Party is all of the registered Democrats in the United States, and the Democratic National Committee are the representatives elected by the states to take care of party business in between the convention. And so if you read the bylaws, you do your key party business at the convention, which we're not doing this year. But that's where the highest authority is. And we went over this in the second segment. What was the original question?
I'm sorry. It was, does changing the Democratic Party's bylaws have any impact on the party? Will they actually follow through, I guess, is the question.
I mean, they do break their rules, but they tend to be sort of the secondary rules. If you go in and change something like the members of the standing committees will be elected in this manner, and you bake that into the bylaws, they will do that, because that is so blatant to not follow that. What we have is basically everyone's agreement that we're going to follow these laws. And as long as we generally adhere to the laws, our society holds together. This is what's so, not to get global about this, but this is what's so worrisome about what's happening in the United States, is that we have people who are starting to not follow the laws and bend the laws and break the laws. And that's how society breaks apart. So I am assuming that if we change the bylaws of the Democratic Party, certainly in the ways that we're proposing, that they will follow them and do them.
And the kind of a two-pronged approach. Like, yes, we need to get these rules that are as democratic as possible. But then, if there are people elected to the DNC who are not following these rules and whatnot, then there has to be consequences that those people need to be removed, because that's basically the manifestation of, hey, these people are not following our all agreed upon rules. And so if you just let that slide, then you have bigger problems, like Larry said, in the U.S. globally, more universally. But but by writing it down and changing the bylaws, that basically is just codifying our shared agreement to all abide by these rules, and makes them much more likely to be followed. So.
We have two options. We can go to the rules, or we can grab our guns. Really. And right now, the agreement, because we are a nation of rules, we will follow the rules. That's in our DNA as a country. It was the basis of the founding of the United States. You're really touching and violating core principles of the basis of this country when you do not follow the rules like that. It's a big deal.
Okay. Have people in MN, that would be Minnesota, correct? I don't want to make sure I don't screw that up. Joined this group?
I believe we have representatives from Minnesota, yes.
Okay.
But we could always use more.
Okay. We've covered most of the questions. There are a couple specifics to registration and credentialing for tomorrow and such. So somebody, Leslie, maybe can follow up on those. But I think we've actually hit most of the questions in the Q&A box. And if we've missed any, I apologize.
I have answered the ones I've seen.
Okay, thanks. And please, I did put Larry's email in the chat box. Somebody suggested that, which was great. So please, if we missed anything, Larry loves email. So please ask him about anything we might have missed. But I think that's all the questions I see for now.
Larry, I just want to add something. The last, I would say 2 to 3 weeks of people signing up for PDPR, I have not done this, but I will invite them to, once they are approved at our meeting on the 21st, send them an invitation to join our Slack workspace. And within the Slack workspace, there are state-specific channels that people can network with other people in their state.
Yes, and you can also get the bylaws of PDPR. So those are the bylaws that we established at the beginning of this organization. So you know how people were elected into the positions that they are in, and when they're going to come up for election. And you can, and so we based this organization on democratic principles from the get-go. And I'm personally using it as a means of teaching people some of the finer points of parliamentary procedure as we conduct the meeting, so everyone understands what happens. And that's actually what I do in all meetings that I preside over, because not everyone is familiar with this stuff. And so a good presiding officer will explain, the options to the delegation so that they can make the proper choice. So again, in terms of the registration, so the closing time for registration was on Friday at noon, but people can, and that is just for people to participate in tomorrow's convention as a voting person. You can watch the proceedings on YouTube, and the link to the YouTube channels is at pdpr.org under the convention tab. And the recordings will be there long after the meetings end for you to review, because some of this material is kind of involved and dense, and it wasn't clear what we were saying when first time you heard it, but you're more than welcome to replay it. I don't think we misstated anything that I can recollect so far today. So you can replay it, and if something isn't clear, maybe reading it, seeing it again would help clarify it. Also, if you would like to donate money to this organization, we have a GoFundMe button on pdpr.org. And, if you'd like to throw $10 our way to help us pay for our sort of basic overhead expenses, that would be great as well. So just go to pdpr.org, find the GoFundMe button, and give us some Bernie cash, like $27 if you're a 1%er. Anything else either of you'd like to add?
I just wanted to say I had put my email address in the chat for folks if anybody has parliamentary type questions. I do like to read bylaws for fun, so I'm perfectly happy to help people out with whatever questions they might have, especially since I know Larry has about 8,001 things going on at any given time. So I can take up some of the slack for him and help people out with things. So
Larry,
if people have questions, feel free to contact me.
I'd like to add a little commercial here. There was a question in the Q&A about the resolutions for tomorrow. Are they available somewhere? And specifically, someone asked about the idea that Bernie delegates to the National Convention vote the platform down if there is not a single-payer Medicare for all plank. And the delegates out of Nevada will be circulating a petition. They're working on the mechanics of it right now to get pledges from Bernie delegates or any other delegates who are willing to do that. We don't expect that there will be a plank on Medicare for all coming out of the platform committee. That's why we're doing this. And we don't expect it to pass, but we want to make a strong statement that there are some people out there not willing to give up on a progressive agenda. So look for that.
So the first question was, where do they see the resolutions we're proposing? If you go to pdpr.org and look for the convention page, there are two buttons that you can click. One button brings up the program for tomorrow that gives us the agenda that we'll be voting on and the content of the platform that we'll be proposing. PDPR has been working on a sort of top hits of the progressive movement into a platform, and we'll be voting on that. That's listed in the program, and then the text of the 6 resolutions that we will be considering tomorrow is also in there. And these are, I have to say that this is the first time where the whereases in the resolutions are drawn from the documents themselves, and they're more than just, COVID. They actually justify the resolving things that we are requesting to happen. So you can read the text of all of the resolutions we'll be proposing in the program itself. I think I hit them all. Oh, and then, what has to happen is for there to be a vote on the platform by anyone but the platform committee, that has to be a change. And so by pressuring the DNC to adhere to the charter of their organization has to happen. They have to allow the delegates to vote on the platform. Otherwise, they are in violation of their own charter. That is a change that has to happen between now and the end of the convention.
And by the way, Larry, somebody just wrote in the Q&A box also to confirm the convention tomorrow will include opportunities for debate, discussion, and amendments on PDPR resolutions, correct?
Yes, and so the rules for tomorrow are listed also in the program. We do have a limited amount of time because it's not a 3-day convention. So there are some rules that circumscribe the rights of the members, but they are not valid until they've been accepted by the members, by the delegation. So if you want to amend the rules to do things like amend the resolutions, then that would be a vote to revise the rules, and a supermajority of depending on the rule, either a majority or a supermajority would have to agree, but those rules belong to you. These are proposed rules for the convention, which you can vote on tomorrow. That currently we're suggesting that we do not amend the resolutions or the platform, just because those debates end up being wordsmithing, and you can spend literally hours arguing over the meaning of one word. We have already gone through that exercise in our committees. These were not one person's vision of what the platform should be. These actually went through the Platform and Resolutions Committee. And so we're suggesting that they be an up or down vote. However, if a supermajority of this group wants to spend the next week debating the platform, that is up to that is their decision to make. I hope I was clear. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. You're welcome to share the links to these videos to your friends if they were unable to attend today, and learn what's going on. And of course, please join pdpr.org. We would love to have your involvement. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.